That piece was written in 1878 by a man who was 55 years old and had spent most of his career being almost completely ignored. Not dismissed, not criticized, just ignored, as if he wasn't quite there. His name was César Franck, and in the last 12 years of his life, he wrote music that changed the course of French organ composition forever. Today we're going to talk about who he was, what he built, and why this quiet, overlooked man left one of the most distinctive marks on the instrument of any composer in history. Welcome back to Pull All the Stops. I'm Jillian Gardner. Let's talk about Franck. César Franck was born in 1822 in Liège, Belgium, which was at that time part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. His father recognized his musical talent early and drove him hard, possibly too hard. Franck was performing publicly as a child prodigy, touring the concert circuit as a teenager, enrolled at the Paris Conservatory at 15. Paris would be his home for the rest of his life. He became a French citizen, married, had children, taught, and for most of his career taught and taught and taught, because composing alone was not going to pay the bills. He held a series of organist positions in Paris, culminating in 1858 when he was appointed organist at the Basilica of Sainte-Clotilde, one of the great Gothic revival churches in Paris, with a magnificent Cavaillé-Coll organ. Aristide Cavaillé-Coll, remember that name, we will come back to it. Franck stayed at Sainte-Clotilde for the rest of his life, 32 years. He played there every Sunday, he improvised there, he composed there, and for most of those 32 years, the wider musical world in Paris paid him almost no attention at all. He was not fashionable. He was not connected to the right circles. He was Belgian, which certain Parisian musical establishments never quite forgave him for. He was quiet, modest, absorbed in his work, not the kind of person who fought for recognition. His students adored him. They called him Père Franck, Father Franck. They followed him through the streets after lessons. They were ferociously loyal, but the establishment largely looked the other way. To understand why Franck's organ music sounds the way it does, you need to understand the instrument he was writing for. And to understand that instrument, you need to understand the man who built it. Aristide Cavaillé-Coll was a French organ builder, arguably the greatest organ builder of the 19th century and one of the most influential in the history of the instrument. He worked in Paris from the 1840s through the end of the century, and he fundamentally reimagined what the pipe organ could do. Here's what Cavaillé-Coll understood that changed everything. The 19th century was the century of the orchestra. Beethoven, Berlioz, Wagner, composers were writing for massive ensembles with extraordinary dynamic range, with instruments that could whisper and then crescendo to something overwhelming. The concert hall was the dominant musical space, and audiences were trained to expect that kind of expressive range. The traditional pipe organ could not do that. A Baroque organ, Bach's organ, Buxtehude's organ, was magnificent, but it worked in terraces. You had soft, medium, loud. You added stops to go louder, removed them to go softer. But you couldn't swell, you couldn't crescendo within a phrase the way a violinist could. The dynamic range was stepped, not continuous. Cavaillé-Coll changed that. He developed a system of swell boxes, enclosures around certain divisions of the organ with movable shutters that the organist controlled with a pedal. Open the shutters, the sound swells. Close them, it diminishes. For the first time, an organist could play a genuine crescendo and diminuendo within a phrase. The organ could sing like a voice. It could breathe like a string section. He also developed new stop types, the harmonic flutes, the gambas, the orchestral reeds, that imitated the timbres of the orchestra instruments with unprecedented accuracy. A Cavaillé-Coll organ could sound like strings, like woodwinds, like brass, like a full orchestra playing in a cathedral. And then he built one of these instruments at Sainte-Clotilde and put César Franck in front of it. What happened next was inevitable. Franck heard what this organ could do, the swells, the colors, the dynamic range, and he started writing music that used all of it. Music that thought orchestrally, music with long, singing melodic lines that grew and diminished naturally, music with harmonic richness borrowed from the German Romantic tradition, from Liszt, from Wagner, combined with French elegance and structural logic. This is what we mean when we talk about the symphonic organ style. It is organ music that thinks like a symphony, that uses the organ's full expressive range, its dynamic flexibility, its tonal variety, its capacity for both grandeur and intimacy, to create something with the scope and emotional depth of the orchestral music. Franck didn't invent this style alone, but he was the first to really show what it could be. And every French organist who came after him, Vidor, Vierne, Dupré, Messiaen, built on what he built. For most of his career, Franck composed in whatever time he could find around his teaching and his church duties. He was up before dawn to compose. He taught all day. He played at Sainte-Clotilde on Sundays. He went home. He went to sleep. He got up and did it again. His wife was not, by most accounts, particularly supportive of his composing. She was practical, she was concerned with money and stability, and a husband who spent his early mornings writing music that nobody performed was not her idea of a productive use of time. And yet he kept going. Quietly, steadily, without much external encouragement, he kept composing. In 1871, when Franck was nearly 50, a group of his students and colleagues founded the Société Nationale de Musique, a society dedicated to promoting new French music. It was partly a response to the humiliation of the Franco-Prussian War and a desire to rebuild French cultural life. And it gave Franck a venue. Suddenly, his music was being performed. Suddenly, people were listening. Late in his life, his 50s and 60s, Franck finally began to be recognized. His symphony in D minor premiered in 1889. His violin sonata was already being celebrated. His organ music was being discovered by a new generation of players. And then in 1890, he was struck by a horse-drawn omnibus in Paris. He suffered a head injury. He seemed to recover, he kept composing, but he had been weakened, and in November of 1890, he died of pleurisy, inflammation of the lungs, at the age of 67. He died having only just begun to receive the recognition he deserved, having spent 40 years composing in the margins of his days, having been overlooked by a musical establishment that simply couldn't be bothered to pay attention. And yet what he left behind, the organ works, the symphony, the chamber music, the violin sonata, is some of the most enduring music of the 19th century. There is something both sad and quietly triumphant about that. Which brings us to the Cantabile in B major, one of the pieces from his collection of works for the Sainte-Clotilde organ published in 1878. The title tells you everything you need to know. Cantabile, Italian for in a singing style. This is not a toccata, it is not a fugue, it is not a showpiece, it is a song. What Franck does here is take everything the Cavaillé-Coll organ could do, the swell boxes, the singing tone of the harmonic flutes and gambas, the capacity for long, continuous phrases with dynamic shaping, and write something that feels completely vocal. The melody sings, it breathes, it does things that would be impossible on a Baroque organ, and that no composer before Franck had quite figured out how to do on the organ. The harmonic language is characteristically Franck, rich, chromatic, full of unexpected turns. He moves between keys in ways that feel inevitable in retrospect but surprising in the moment. There are sequences in this piece that could have been written by Wagner and yet sound completely unmistakably French. It runs about 6 minutes. Listen to how the melody breathes. Listen to the way the dynamics move, not in steps but continuously, like a voice. That is the Cavaillé-Coll organ, and that is Franck using it the way it was built to be used. Here it is. If the cantabile opens something up for you, here's where to go next. The Three Chorales, written in the last weeks of his life in 1890, are his greatest organ works. Chorale number 1 in E major is often considered his masterpiece. He reportedly said in his deathbed that he was content to have written it. It is about 20 minutes of music that contains an entire emotional world. The piece Heroique is the other side of Franck, grand, powerful, full-throated. Where the cantabile whispers, the piece Heroique declaims. Together they give you the full range of what he could do. And if you want to follow the thread forward, listen to Charles Marie Widor's Organ Symphony No. 5, particularly the famous toccata movement. Widor was Franck's contemporary, and the two of them, more than any other composers, defined what French organ music would become. We will have a full episode on Widor soon. Père Franck, overlooked for 40 years, recognized too late, gone too soon, but the music stayed. It always does. Next Friday on Pull All the Stops, Hymn of the Week, we're looking at Holy, 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 written by Reginald Herbert in 1826, set to one of the most majestic tunes in all of hymnody and packed with Trinitarian theology that most congregations sing right past. We're going to slow down and actually look at it. Subscribe so you don't miss it. New videos every Tuesday and Friday. Leave me a comment. Had you heard César Franck before today? And if you had, was it his organ music or something else that brought you to him first? I'm Jillian Gardner. This is Pull All the Stops. See you Friday.